Smoke curled into the night sky, heavy and bitter, coating the air with the stench of burning flesh and stone. The once bright banners of her kingdom lay torn and blackened, trampled beneath the boots of wolves who prowled through the wreckage. Princess Selene staggered as the soldiers shoved her forward, her silk gown torn to shreds, blood splattered on the hem. Her wrists were bound with iron cuffs, heavy and cutting deep into her skin. She tried to lift her chin, though every step crunched over what was left of her people. And then she saw him. The Alpha. He stood at the center of the ruins, tall and broad, his presence sucking the air from the night. Golden eyes flickered beneath the shadows of the firelight, his dark hair falling messily across his forehead. He didn't smile at his victory, didn't sneer. He simply watched her with a silence that was worse than mockery. Selene's throat burned. "You butchered them all," she hissed, her voice hoarse but sharp. "One day I'll see you burn for this." The wolves holding her snarled, ready to strike, but the Alpha raised a hand. His calm was unnerving. He stepped closer, his boots stopping inches from her knees where she knelt in the ash. The firelight caught the sharp lines of his face, the cold power etched in it. He leaned down just enough for his voice to be heard. "Your father burned first," he said lowly. "You'll remember that while you serve me." Her heart stuttered. She spat at his boots, her rage trembling through her chains. A growl echoed from the wolves surrounding them, but again the Alpha's hand kept them back. He didn't strike her, he didn't kill her. That would have been a mercy. Instead, he turned his back to her as though she were nothing. "Take her," he ordered, his voice a blade in the smoke. "Bring her to the pack. Let her clean the stones her father's blood once stained." The chains jerked as they dragged her away. Selene clawed at the ground, leaving bloody streaks in the dirt, her gaze locked on the Alpha's back as he disappeared into the blaze. Hatred burned hotter than the fire around her. The journey to their lands was brutal. Selene was shoved into the back of a wagon, her wrists still chained, every jolt bruising her knees against the wooden floor. She refused to cry, refused to let them see her break, but when the gates of their territory creaked open, her stomach twisted. It was vast, stone walls curling like a fortress, houses sprawling beneath the shadow of the mountains. Wolves filled the courtyards, curious eyes turning toward the chained princess dragged from the wagon. Whispers spread fast, cutting sharp through the cold night air. "Is that her? The king's daughter? She should have been executed with the others. She reeks of weakness." Selene lifted her chin higher, though her wrists ached. If they wanted to see a broken girl, they'd be disappointed. At the stairs of the pack house, two figures waited. A tall young man with the same sharp golden eyes as the Alpha, but with fire instead of ice in them. And beside him, a woman with sleek black hair, her arms crossed, lips curling into a cruel smile. The brother sneered first. "So this is the princess? Doesn't look like much." He stepped forward, circling her like a predator. "I heard your father begged before he died. Did you beg too?" Selene's jaw clenched. "I would rather die on these steps than whimper before you." His eyes flashed with fury, but before he could strike her, the Alpha's voice cut through the crowd. "That's enough, Kyle." Every wolf stilled. The cold Alpha descended the stairs, his gaze unreadable, his steps measured. He stopped before her close enough that she felt the heat radiating off him, though his expression remained carved from stone. "She belongs to the pack now," he said, his tone final. "Not as a guest, not as a prisoner. She will serve." The sister laughed lightly, tilting her head. "Serve? The little princess with her soft hands? What use could she be?" The Alpha's gaze flickered, just once, to Selene's wrists, the raw skin beneath the iron. Then his eyes hardened again. She will learn. And that was it. He turned away, leaving the brother and sister smirking down at her. The brother leaned close, his whisper hot against her ear. "You'll scrub our floors, princess. Maybe we'll even let you clean the stables. Let's see how much pride you have left then." The sister's laugh followed as the chains yanked Selene forward, dragging her inside the pack house. Selene's chest heaved, but her eyes never lowered, not for them, not even for him. She swore in that moment, if she couldn't kill them all, she would at least never bow. The first week was worse than any nightmare. They gave Selene no room of her own, just a thin blanket on the stone floor of the servants' quarters. Dawn meant scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled, hauling buckets of water that froze her wrists raw, and enduring the smirks and whispers of wolves who had once bowed to her father's crown. The brother, Kyle, seemed to delight in assigning her the filthiest tasks. He made her polish boots caked in mud, clean the kennels, and kneel to pick up scraps in front of the warriors. The sister, Leora, mocked every movement, every breath. Careful, princess, wouldn't want to break a nail. But it was not their cruelty that hollowed Selene's chest most. It was him, the Alpha. He spoke little, rarely addressed her directly. Yet Selene felt him everywhere, a silent storm cloaked in flesh. At the training grounds, his eyes would track her when she carried water to the warriors. At meals, she felt his gaze linger when she set the table, though he never said a word. Once, when she stumbled on the stairs with a tray of wine, the cups clattered loudly. Kyle had risen at once, fury flashing in his eyes, hand raised to strike her. But then the Alpha's voice cut through. Leave her. That was all, just 2 words. Cold, sharp, final. Kyle froze, lowering his hand, though his glare promised punishment later. Selene caught her breath, trembling as she gathered the fallen cups. She had expected pity in the Alpha's eyes, maybe mockery. Instead, when she dared to glance up, she saw nothing but that frozen stare, unreadable and vast as a winter sky. He turned away first, and it felt like being dismissed, forgotten, erased. Days blurred into weeks. Selene learned quickly how to move silently, how to swallow pride with every order barked at her, how to harden her jaw so no one saw her crack. But at night, when she lay curled on the cold floor, it was his eyes. It was a celebration night at the those golden shards of silence. The long table stretched like a scar through the great hall. The air smelled of roasted meat, fresh bread, and the faint tang of smoke from the fire pits. Warriors laughed and muttered in low tones, their voices heavy with pride after last night's hunt. But when she walked in carrying the tray, every sound seemed to sharpen, their gazes cutting into her like blades. The princess, no crown, no silk, only a plain grey dress that hung loosely on her, kept her chin lowered. Her fingers trembled slightly around the heavy jug of wine, but she forced them still. She would not show weakness here, not in front of them, not in front of him. At the head of the table, Alpha Lucian sat. His presence was a shadow across the hall. He had not spoken to her since the night of her capture, but his silence had been louder than 1,000 words. Cold hazel eyes tracked her every move, and though his expression remained carved from stone, she felt it, his hatred, his hunger for vengeance, pressing down on her like a weight. She poured for his warriors, one by one, ignoring their sneers, their muttered insults. She reached the end of the table, where Lucian sat like a king of wolves, broad-shouldered, his black hair tied back, his hands clasped before him. Her throat tightened as she reached for his cup. Her wrist shook, barely, but enough. A drop of wine spilled against the edge of his plate, red like blood against the wood. The hall went quiet. Lucian's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with iron restraint. Gasps scattered around the table. She froze, staring at the rough strength of his fingers around her pale skin, then slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. Those eyes, cold, merciless, yet burning with something she couldn't name. His voice was low, sharp as steel. Do they not teach princesses how to serve in your ruined kingdom? Her cheeks burned with humiliation. The wolves at the table chuckled darkly, enjoying the spectacle. She wanted to spit at him, to curse him, but her voice caught in her throat. Lucian leaned closer, so close she felt the heat of his breath against her cheek. Here, you will learn, or you will break. He released her wrist suddenly, and she stumbled back, nearly dropping the jug. The laughter around her rose, but she kept her face stone still, swallowing the fire inside her chest. The bonfire burned high into the night sky, its flames painting the clearing in hues of gold and blood red. Sparks rose like restless spirits, twisting upward into the dark. The entire pack had gathered, wolves and humans alike, their eyes gleaming in the firelight, the air heavy with the raw pulse of unity. and vengeance. Selene stood at the edge of it all, her plain dress smelling of smoke, her hair catching stray flickers of flame. She tried to steady her breathing, but her chest felt tight, as though invisible chains wrapped around her lungs. At the heart of the circle, Alpha Lucian stood. His presence was magnetic, his silence more commanding than shouts. When he finally stepped forward, the murmurs died at once. His voice carried like thunder, deep and restrained, every syllable soaked in weight. Tonight we stand as one. Tonight we honor not only the blood that runs in our veins, but the blood that was spilled unjustly years ago. The crowd answered with a rumble of agreement, growls low and simmering. Lucian's gaze flickered briefly toward her, just a fraction of a second before he turned back to his people. Many of you remember. Some of you were only children. When the Mad King came, he butchered our families. He took, enslaved, burned. My siblings and I watched our parents fall by his blade, his greed tearing apart our home. We rebuilt from ashes, but scars remain. The pack howled, voices laced with pain and rage. Selene's hands balled into fists at her sides. She remembered the whispers, the stories of war, but her father had never shown her that side. To her, he had been warmth, sternness, protection. Could a man be both? Lucian's voice softened, barely, but enough for her to hear the shadow behind it. Nothing I do will bring them back. Not my mother, not my father, not the brothers and sisters you lost. But vengeance was ours the night we claimed the king's castle, the night we burned his throne. The crowd roared. Then his hand lifted, pointing toward her. The fire seemed to flare higher, spotlighting her in its cruel glow. And here she stands, his daughter, his blood. She is here not as royalty, not as a princess, but as proof. She will serve, she will suffer, just as we once did in the hands of her father's cruelty. The growls and laughter rose around her. She stood still, silent, her jaw locked though her chest burned. She had no defense, she had no words. She had seen her father's cruelty, though it had never touched her. She had looked away too many times, told herself she was powerless. And now, this was her punishment. Her eyes found Lucian's across the fire. His gaze was unreadable, hard as stone. Yet somewhere deep inside, she thought she saw it again, that flicker of sorrow, that ache he buried beneath the armor. But no one else saw. No one cared. When the fire dimmed and the pack dispersed into the night, Selene found herself alone by the water trough, scrubbing pots until her knuckles were raw. The night was still, the stars cruel in their beauty. She tried to keep her back straight, her lips pressed tight, but the weight of it all, the humiliation, the loss, the memories of her father's smile, crushed her chest. Her hands stilled on the pot. Then the first tear fell. It came quietly, sliding down her cheek, hitting the metal with a soft splash. Then another, and another. Soon she was hunched over, shoulders shaking, her breath breaking in the cold night air. Sobs tore out of her throat, muffled by her hand as though she were ashamed of the sound. She cried for her kingdom, for her people, for the girl she used to be. And somewhere in that flood of grief, she cried for the father who had loved her, even if he had been a monster to the world. The summons came at night. One of the pack guards found her hauling water from the well, his voice clipped as he delivered the message. "Kyle wants you. Now." Selene's stomach twisted, but she didn't argue. She followed the torchlit path to the west wing, every step heavier than the last. Kyle's chambers were carved into stone, lavish compared to the servants' quarters, fur rugs, golden goblets, the faint smell of spiced wine clinging to the air. He sat in a chair by the hearth, boots kicked up, a smirk already stretching his lips. His eyes slid over her like a wolf over prey. "Princess," he drawled, tilting his head, "I was wondering how long it would take before you stopped pretending you're above us. You've been scrubbing our floors, fetching our wine, bowing your head. But I know what you are. You're still a royal, still thinking someone might come rescue you." Selene stood stiffly by the door, arms folded tight against her chest. "What do you want, Kyle?" He rose slowly, circling her with the lazy confidence of a predator that knows the cage is locked. "What I want," he murmured, "is simple. I could take it any time I please, but—" He brushed a strand of her hair from her shoulder, his fingers lingering. "I'd rather you gave it willingly. Think of it as me being kind." Selena's jaw clenched. She forced herself to meet his eyes, her voice low but steady. "I'd rather chew pins." For a moment, Kyle's smirk faltered. Then his hand shot out, gripping her hair and yanking her head back until her eyes watered. His breath was hot against her cheek. "So you think you're clever?" he hissed. "I've seen the way you look at my brother, like he's some savior, like he'll swoop in and shield you." His laugh was sharp, cruel. "Lucian will never save you. He'll sell you off or toss you to the pack as their breeder, and he won't even blink." His free hand slid down her arm, brushing her hip, drifting lower. "So why waste yourself waiting for him when you could have me?" Revulsion burned through her. With a violent jerk, Selene tore herself free, stumbling back toward the door. Her heart hammered as she spat, "I'll never choose you." Kyle's grin widened, dark and dangerous. He didn't chase her. He only watched, eyes gleaming as she fled his chambers, her breath ragged, her pulse roaring in her ears. She didn't stop running until she reached the servants' quarters, her body trembling with fury, fear and something sharper. Shame she refused to own. The night stretched long, and when the feast was over, Selene found herself kneeling in the kitchens, scrubbing soot-blackened pots until her arms ached. Her hair clung damp against her face, her knees raw against the stone floor. "Don't let them get to you," a voice whispered. Selene flinched, turning sharply. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching a small stack of folded linens. The younger wolf girl's eyes were gentle, full of sympathy that stung worse than cruelty. "They laugh because they're broken," Lily said softly, setting the linens down. "They've lost so much. Sometimes it's easier to tear someone else apart than to face what's missing." Selene exhaled shakily, scrubbing harder at the pot. "And your Alpha? He sat there and let them treat me like cattle. What excuse do you have for that?" For the first time, Lily's expression changed. A flicker of something fierce entered her gaze as she shook her head. "No, you're wrong about him. Lucian isn't heartless. He's hurt. Everything he does, it comes from that pain. You don't see it, but I do." Selene stared at her, stunned into silence. The words tangled in her throat, mockery, bitterness, disbelief. But none would come. Lily smiled faintly, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "One day, maybe you'll see him too." With that, she turned and slipped away, leaving Selene alone with the echo of laughter still clinging to her skin, and a seed of doubt she didn't want to water. A year had passed. A year of carrying trays, scrubbing stone floors until her hands bled, biting her tongue when Kyle smirked too close, when whispers followed her like a curse. A year of silence, of swallowing pain, of teaching herself to survive where survival wasn't meant for her. She was no longer the pampered princess of a fallen kingdom. She was something harder now, something sharper. But grief has a way of waiting. That night, as the pack gathered after training, laughter and sweat heavy in the air, Selene stepped forward with the water jug clutched in her hands. Her heart thundered, not with fear, but with defiance. For once, she didn't lower her eyes. She let them lock on him, the Alpha Lucian. The firelight caught the angles of his face, throwing shadows across his jaw, his eyes like dark steel as he sat above the rest, silent as ever. The laughter of his wolves quieted when they realized she hadn't moved, hadn't retreated after pouring their drinks. Her lips were dry, but she forced the words out. "I want to go to the ruins." A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. One of the warriors barked a laugh. Kyle leaned back lazily and smirked. "The princess wants to go cry over her father's bones?" Heat rushed to Selene's face, but she stood straighter. "I want to pay my respects. To my family. To what was lost." The words dropped heavy into the air. Lucian hadn't moved. His eyes, sharp as blades, pinned her from across the fire. Silent. Cold. Watching her in a way that made her chest tighten, though she refused to look away. Kael's voice was mocking now, cruel. Better we drag her there in chains and let her weep in the ashes like the spoiled brat she is. A few chuckled, but their voices faltered when Lucian finally shifted. The Alpha rose to his feet. The firelight caught in his black hair, his broad shoulders tense. With nothing more than a look, the warriors fell silent. Enough. That single word silenced the night. Then, without looking away from her, he dismissed them all. One by one they drifted into the shadows until only he and Selene remained. Her throat tightened when he began to walk toward her, each step deliberate, a predator closing in. "You think," Lucian said softly, dangerously, "that you deserve to mourn him?" His voice cut through her like a blade. She flinched but held her ground. "He was my father." Lucian's eyes burned. "He was a butcher, a tyrant who enslaved my people, who murdered my parents and called it conquest." Selene's heart ached, but she lifted her chin. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "I know. I saw his cruelty. I hated it. But he was still my father. He was still the man who held me when I was small, who sang me to sleep when no one else did. I didn't choose his sins. I didn't choose this war." For a moment silence stretched between them. His jaw clenched. Something flickered in his eyes, something broken, something buried. He turned from her, his back rigid. For a second she thought that was it, that he'd leave her standing there with nothing but her raw words. But then his voice came, quiet, rough. "Prepare. At dawn." Her breath caught. Lucian didn't look at her as he walked away into the night, but his words echoed like a vow. At dawn she would return to the ruins of her kingdom. At dawn she would face the ghosts she'd been carrying all this time, and it would be him, Alpha Lucian, her captor, her enemy, her shadow, who would take her there. The morning was pale and cold when she stepped into the clearing. A fog clung to the earth, curling around her ankles as if the forest itself wanted to hold her back. Lucian was already there, waiting. He stood beside a tall black horse, his hand absently stroking its mane. His dark hair was tied at the nape of his neck, his broad shoulders tense beneath his leather tunic. He didn't greet her, didn't acknowledge her until she finally moved closer. His eyes cut to hers, sharp and unreadable. Her breath caught when she realized the truth. "You're riding," she murmured, glancing at the massive animal. "I can't keep up with that." Lucian didn't blink, didn't move. Then, with the same deadly calm he always carried, he extended his hand toward her. His palm was open, waiting. Selene froze. His hand looked like both a lifeline and a trap. She could feel her heart slamming in her chest. Seconds stretched. When she didn't move, Lucian's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, and with a quiet scoff of annoyance, he withdrew his hand as if she wasn't worth the trouble. He turned slightly, ready to mount alone, leaving her behind without another word. "Wait!" The word tore out of her before she could stop it. Lucian stopped. His head turned slowly back toward her. That one word, her voice breaking against it, hung between them. Her lips trembled. She hated herself for it, but her chest rose and fell too quickly as she forced her hand forward. "Help me," she whispered. For a long moment he only looked at her, his expression carved from stone. Then, in silence, he reached out again. His grip was firm, warm, and it startled her. With effortless strength he pulled her closer and guided her up. She gasped as he lifted her onto the horse, the sudden closeness dizzying. When she wobbled, his hand came around her waist, steadying her. The heat of him bled through her thin dress. "Hold on," Lucian said, his voice a low command that vibrated through her bones. Before she could protest, he swung up behind her. His chest pressed against her back, his thighs bracketing hers, his breath ghosting against her hair. Selene stiffened, her body taut with every nerve on fire. The horse moved forward, and the world tilted, her hands clutching the mane desperately. Every shift of movement pressed her against him, every inhale filling her nose with the dangerous, intoxicating scent of him. Pine, smoke, something darker. Her skin prickled, her stomach coiled. She hated how alive she felt. Lucian said nothing. But behind her, his chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, as if he too was wrestling something he couldn't control. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could hear his teeth grind. And then she swore she heard it. A sound, so low and guttural it almost wasn't words at all. Mine. It wasn't spoken for her. It was spoken against himself, against his wolf, against the fate clawing at him from within. Selene's breath hitched. She didn't dare turn around. She didn't dare look at him. But the word seared through her, sinking into her bones, leaving her trembling in ways she didn't understand. Her fingers tightened on the reins, trying to steady herself. But no amount of control could stop the truth of it, the way her body betrayed her, the way heat curled low in her belly, the way every shift of the horse pressed her more firmly against him until she wanted to scream. Lucian stayed silent, but his hands on the reins gripped so hard the leather strained. His wolf was roaring inside him, demanding, claiming. And for the first time, Selene realized that maybe the chains binding her to this pack weren't the ones she could see. The ruins rose out of the earth like broken bones, jagged towers clawing toward the sky, walls charred black from fire that had long since burned out. Ash still clung to cracks in the stone, as though time itself refused to wash away the memory. The air was thick, heavy with the ghosts of screams that once filled the place. Selene slid down from Lucian's horse, her knees almost buckling when her boots touched the ground. The palace had been magnificent once. She remembered marble staircases, the banners of her father's house flapping high in the wind, golden torches burning through the night. Now it was all rubble, hollow, lifeless. Her throat burned as she stepped forward. The breeze carried the faint smell of smoke, though she knew it was only her mind recreating it. Her hands trembled as her eyes traced the courtyard where she used to chase butterflies as a child. Now it was nothing but broken stones, a graveyard without headstones. "This was your father's kingdom," Lucian's voice rumbled low, almost unreadable. He sat astride his horse, dark eyes scanning the wreckage. "This is what remains of his greed." Selene didn't answer. She walked further in until her knees finally gave way on a patch of scorched earth. Her palms pressed into the dirt as though she could feel them. Her father's presence, her mother's laughter, the echoes of the guards who once bowed when she passed. Her breath cracked, her chest heaving. "He was cruel," she whispered, though her words trembled with defiance. "I know what he did. I saw it. But—" Her voice broke, a sob shaking through her. "He was still my father. He kissed my hair goodnight. He taught me to read. He wasn't only a monster to me." The words spilled out like a confession, bitter and desperate. Lucian dismounted, boots crunching against gravel as he came to stand behind her. His shadow stretched long across the ground, draping over her like a shroud. He said nothing for a long time, and the silence cut deeper than any words. Finally, his voice reached her, quiet but sharp. "You cry for a man who enslaved my people, who ordered their deaths without blinking. Do you know how many children never got to bury their fathers because of him?" Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn. Tears streaked down her cheeks, falling into the dirt. "And do you think I don't bleed for them too? I was a child. I couldn't stop him. But I loved him. And now I don't even know who I am without him. All I have left are ashes." Her body shook as she sobbed, her small frame collapsing forward. For the first time in a year, Selene wasn't holding herself together with gritted teeth and silence. She broke, raw and human in the ruins of her past. Lucian's jaw tightened. His wolf stirred violently inside him, restless, caught between rage and something else he refused to name. He should have turned away, let her wallow in the ruin she came from. But instead, his hand hovered, just for a moment, before it brushed her shoulder. It wasn't comfort. Not exactly. It was a touch born of confusion, of something unspoken twisting in his chest. Selene flinched at the contact, but she didn't move away. The ruins swallowed them both, two enemies kneeling in the ashes of one fallen kingdom, one grieving, the other remembering, both chained by the sins of a dead king neither could escape. The ride back was cloaked in silence. The steady beat of hooves against dirt was the only sound between them. Selene sat stiff in front of him, hands knotted in the reins, her face pale from the storm of emotions she'd left at the ruins. Lucian's gaze never left the darkening forest. Shadows stretched long, swallowing the path as the last streaks of daylight faded. His wolf stirred uneasily, a low growl in the back of his mind. "We stop here," he said at last, voice edged with command. "It's too dangerous to ride through the forest at night." Selene slid down from the horse without protest. She sank near a fallen log, rubbing her arms as the cool night air wrapped around them. Lucian busied himself with gathering wood, his movements sharp and efficient, his eyes never resting for long in one place. When the fire finally crackled to life, its glow softening the harsh planes of his face, Selene yawned despite herself. Her eyes stung, her body weary. Lucian noticed. He tossed her a strip of dried meat from his pack. "Eat." She blinked, surprised, but took it. Her small fingers tore into it as though she hadn't eaten in days. Between bites, she glanced up at him, noticing the untouched food in his hand. "Aren't you hungry?" she asked quietly. Lucian's jaw flexed. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable, before flicking back to the fire. "Mind your business." The words cut, blunt and cold, but there was no real bite to them. Still, she pressed her lips together and looked away. That was when it came, a sound, low, dragging through the trees like claws over bark. Lucian's head snapped toward the forest, eyes narrowing. Another sound followed, closer this time, heavy paws brushing against fallen leaves. He was on his feet in an instant, pulling her behind him with a single sharp motion. His hand went to the sword strapped to his back. "If it gets too much," he said, voice low, dangerous, "you shift. Run if you have to." Selene froze, her heart hammering. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet. I turn 21 in 2 weeks." A curse hissed through Lucian's teeth. He turned, his grip tightening on her arm. His eyes, burning gold now, locked on hers. "Then stay close, closer than your own shadow." As if the forest itself obeyed the command, 2 wolves burst from the trees, snarling, eyes gleaming with feral hunger. Lucian moved like a storm, his sword flashing. One wolf went down before it could touch the ground, the other lunged, but he spun, blade slicing through fur and flesh in a single motion. Selene barely had time to breathe before more shapes emerged from the darkness. 5, 6, too many. Lucian's fury snapped. His body trembled, then shifted in an explosion of muscle and bone. His massive wolf form tore into the attackers, a blur of teeth and crimson rage. Selene gripped his second sword, the weight familiar in her hands. "Thank you, old man," she thought fleetingly, remembering her late butler's lessons. With clumsy but determined swings, she kept another wolf at bay, steel meeting fang. Her chest burned with fear, but her arms moved, striking, defending. She managed to slash one across the muzzle, forcing it back. For a fleeting second she thought she might hold her ground, but one slipped through. Its body slammed into her, knocking the breath from her lungs. She flew back, crashing into the trunk of a tree with a sickening crack. Pain flared, then everything went black. Lucian roared. The sound shook the forest, tearing through night air like thunder. His fury multiplied, his wolf tearing through the rest with a savagery that left the earth painted red. When the last body dropped, silence rushed back, broken only by his ragged breaths. Shifting back, bloodied and bare-chested, Lucian stumbled to her. "Selene," he growled, his voice breaking as he dropped to his knees beside her. Her head lolled against the tree, a trickle of blood painting her temple. For the first time in years, panic clawed at him. He pressed his hand against her chest, feeling for the rise and fall. Relief slammed into him when he felt it. Faint, but there. He cradled her face in his hands, his thumb brushing the smear of blood. His wolf raged inside, demanding, screaming, "Mine!" Lucian bent low, forehead pressing against hers, his breath unsteady. "Don't you dare die on me, girl," he muttered, voice rough. "Not like this. Not here." The fire cracked behind them. The forest, finally silent, held its breath. The world swam when Selene's eyes fluttered open. The ceiling above her wasn't the forest canopy, but the low, worn beams of the servant quarters. The sharp ache in her ribs pulled a groan from her lips before she could stop it. Selene! Lily's face leaned into view, her brows drawn tight with worry. Her hands fluttered as if she didn't know whether to hug her or not. Oh, thank the goddess. You're awake. I thought you'd sleep for another day. Selene blinked, throat dry, voice hoarse. What happened? Lily perched on the edge of the cot, lowering her voice as though sharing a delicious secret. Rogues. A whole pack of them. Alpha Lucian slaughtered them all. You should have seen him. Blood, teeth, claws, the works. Then he carried you back here like you weighed nothing at all. I swear, Selene, half the pack saw it. They'll be talking for weeks. Selene's cheeks warmed despite herself. She forced a scowl, looking away. Carried me? Oh, carried, Lily said, dragging out the word with a grin. In his arms, bridal style. Like something out of those silly romances. Don't even try to deny it. I saw the way his jaw was clenched. He looked ready to murder anyone who even looked at you wrong. Selene's heart stuttered, but she masked it with a roll of her eyes. He probably just didn't want the healer's work ruined if I dropped dead on the way. Lily hummed, clearly unconvinced. She tapped Selene's hand gently. You had a concussion and 2 broken ribs. He brought you straight here and stood there like a shadow until the healer finished binding you. Then he ordered, that you're to rest the entire week. Selena huffed, shifting painfully against the cot. Of course he did. Her tone was sharp, but the corners of her mouth betrayed the faintest twitch of something softer. Lily caught it, her grin widening. You can keep rolling your eyes, but I know what I saw. Cold Alpha Lucian carrying the daughter of his enemy like she was something precious. Selene groaned, pulling the thin blanket over her face. You're insufferable. But, under the blanket, her lips pressed together, holding back the memory of strong arms, the steady thrum of his heartbeat against her, and the way he'd whispered words she thought she imagined. Don't you dare die on me. The door creaked before Lily could tease her further. Both girls stiffened, and then the air in the room thickened as Alpha Lucian stepped inside. He filled the doorway like a shadow, his dark gaze cutting straight to Selene on the cot. Lily scrambled to her feet, stammering, Alpha. Lucian's eyes barely flicked her way. Leave us. Lily gave Selene a quick look, a mix of worry and excitement, before slipping out, the door shutting softly behind her. Silence stretched, heavy and tense, until Lucian crossed the room. His boots sounded too loud on the worn floorboards. He stopped at the side of her bed. You're awake. Selene forced herself to meet his gaze, even as her ribs burned. Barely. Her voice was clipped. Thanks for the delivery service, by the way. I hear I was carried like a sack of potatoes across half the pack. His eyes narrowed, the faintest twitch at his jaw. You were unconscious. And bleeding. You couldn't even breathe right. Selene swallowed, hating the way his words made her chest warm. She shifted, wincing at the stab of pain. Well, I'm alive. You can stop brooding now. Lucian leaned down slightly, his shadow falling over her face, his voice low and flat. If you'd been killed. He cut himself off, jaw tightening, then straightened, his walls slamming back up. Don't be reckless again. Her laugh was brittle, defiant. Reckless? I was fending off rogues while you were playing butcher. You should be thanking me. Something dark flickered in his gaze, almost amusement. You call that swordplay? His voice dipped into that cool, mocking drawl. You'd be dead if not for me. Her temper flared. And you'd be dead of boredom if not for me, she shot back. For a long heartbeat, they just stared at each other, her eyes blazing, his like a storm kept barely at bay. Then Lucian shifted, almost like he might say something else, but instead he turned. Rest. You'll need your strength. At the door he paused, his back to her. 2 weeks until you shift. His voice was quieter, rougher. Until then, don't leave my sight. And then he was gone, leaving Selene gaping at the door, her heart hammering like a war drum. Arrogant brute, she muttered under her breath, but the heat crawling up her neck betrayed her. The little celebration had been enough to make her chest ache in ways she hadn't felt in a long time. Martha, the head cook, had insisted she eat 2 thick slices of carrot cake, brushing her protests away with a plump hand and a soft, "You're far too thin, child." The sweet warmth of the cake had almost made her forget she was a captive. Almost. The servants had smiled at her, really smiled. Not all of them, but enough to notice. Even the usual harsh whispers were absent. Selene couldn't shake Lily's words from earlier, teasing as they'd been. Maybe it's because they saw the way Alpha carried you back like you were the most precious thing in the world. She'd flushed and rolled her eyes at the time, but now, alone, the memory sent a strange shiver down her spine. Even Kale had left her alone these past days, his sneering taunts conspicuously absent. For the first time since she was dragged into this place, Selene almost felt safe. The servants had dispersed by dusk, leaving her with a stomach full of cake and a strange, restless energy. After a hot bath that melted away the lingering aches in her ribs, she slipped into one of the simple dresses Martha had repaired for her. Blue, soft, with tiny embroidered flowers near the hem, it wasn't royal silk, but somehow she felt dainty in it, whole. She let her feet carry her past the edge of the servants' wing, through winding paths until the trees opened to reveal the lakeside. The surface shimmered under the rising moon, silver ripples dancing with the breeze. Selene hugged herself and breathed deep, the scent of water lilies and damp earth filling her lungs. For a moment, she let her mind wander back to her old life, the palace garden fountains, her father's booming laugh, her mother's perfume. The ache in her chest returned sharp, but she forced it down. This place wasn't the same, but it was hers now, even if it was by force. She crouched by the water's edge, trailing her fingers along the cool surface, and whispered to herself, "Happy birthday, Selene." A self-gift, quiet and bittersweet. The forest stirred behind her, a prickle racing down her neck. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. That heavy, charged silence belonged to only one man, Lucian. He stopped a few paces behind her, his silence a presence of its own. Then, after what felt like an eternity, his voice broke the quiet, low and even. "You look beautiful." Selene blinked, stunned more by the softness than the words themselves. Her lips parted, then snapped shut. Beautiful? From him? She let out a laugh, sharp to cover the rush in her chest. "Careful, Alpha. Pay me too many compliments and people might think you don't bite." He didn't smile, didn't frown, just studied her with those unreadable eyes. "I bite," he said simply, and she nearly choked on her own breath. Before she could retort, he reached into the pocket of his dark coat and pulled out something small. A delicate glimmer caught the moonlight. He held it out, and Selene gasped softly. It was a necklace, thin silver chain glinting like threads of starlight. At its center rested a blue moonstone, polished so perfectly it seemed to hold the lake's glow within it. The stone shimmered, alive with light every time it caught the moon. Her throat tightened. You didn't have to." Lucian's gaze didn't waver. His tone was steady, almost clipped, but there was something else buried beneath. "I don't do what I have to. I do what I choose." The words hit harder than she wanted them to. She looked down, fingers brushing the stone, then up again. "Will you—" She stopped, breath hitching. "Will you put it on for me?" She lifted her hair, the blonde waves tumbling forward over her shoulder. For a moment, nothing. Then she felt him behind her. Lucian's warmth pressed close, not touching, but enough to stir the air between them. His rough fingers brushed her skin as he clasped the chain at the back of her neck. Goosebumps raced down her arms, betraying her, and she prayed he didn't notice. But of course he did. He lingered, fingertips grazing the soft curve of her nape, tracing the line where her skin met hair. Slow. Subtle. Enough to make her shiver. "Beautiful," he murmured, the word vibrating against her skin. Her breath caught, heat rushing to her cheeks, her body betraying her again as her heart pounded like a drum. Then, leaning close enough that his breath ghosted against her ear, he whispered, "Happy birthday, Selene." And just like that he stepped away, turning, leaving her standing at the lakeside with the moonlight burning on her necklace and her own pulse hammering loud in her ears. The damp night air clung cool to her skin, but Selene was flushed hot, her chest tight, her hands trembling where they clutched the stone. Lucian's shadow disappeared into the trees, but his scent lingered, intoxicating and heavy. She stayed there long after, staring at her reflection in the lake, heart erratic, throat dry. The night after her 21st birthday carried a quiet hush, as if the entire world had stilled just for her. Selene's hands trembled when she smoothed down the folds of the thin white dress, its fabric clinging to her damp skin from the bath. Her necklace lay on the table, its absence on her chest making her feel exposed, unanchored. Yet she knew she couldn't wear it tonight. It was time to meet the moon without any shield. Martha's words still echoed in her mind. "You'll know when it's happening, child. Don't be afraid. Just let the moon take you." She had nodded bravely, but now, as her bare feet touched the cool earth outside, her courage faltered. "Do you want me to come with you?" Lily's soft voice reached her, warm, hesitant. Selene managed a small smile, shaking her head. "Not this time. Stay, please." And so she walked alone. The night air pressed close, whispering through the trees as she moved toward the lake. The water gleamed like silver glass under the first glimmers of moonlight, and the grass shivered beneath her toes. She drew in a breath, then tugged the white dress over her head. It slipped from her fingers, falling like a ghost at her feet. Naked in the pale dark, she felt the heavens bear their eyes on her, every star, every shadow, watching. Then the pull came. It was faint at first, a heat spreading through her bones, a restless quake in her muscles. But as the full moon broke free of the clouds and spilled its power onto her skin, the pain crashed over her like fire. Selene cried out, clutching at her sides, her spine arching back, her knees buckled, nails clawing into the dirt. The sound of bones cracking filled the silence of the lakeside. She gasped for air, her breath coming out ragged and wet as her body convulsed, reshaping itself. Every nerve burned, every joint split and tore. Her scream echoed across the water, raw and unearthly, carrying a note of both agony and freedom. Skin rippled, stretched, fingers twisted, curling into claws. Her body bent unnaturally, reshaped by something older than time. And then, through the veil of torment, she felt it, her soul, rising, expanding, merging with the wild. The lake reflected it all, the fragile girl, breaking apart beneath the white gaze of the moon and the shadow of something new, something fierce. Lucian had been restless all evening. He couldn't read, couldn't sit still. The energy in the air was too sharp, too alive. Then it struck him, sudden and irresistible. A pull deep in his chest, yanking him toward the woods. His wolf surged, pacing, demanding he move. He stripped quickly, the earth cool under his feet, and gave in to the shift. The change tore through him like lightning, but it wasn't pain. It was release. Fur rippled across his skin, muscles lengthened and broke free, and soon he stood as the beast, senses sharpened, heart thundering. The scent hit him first, wild, new, electric. Then he saw her. By the lake stood a wolf unlike any he had ever laid eyes on, sleek black fur glinting under the moonlight, streaks of white tracing her sides like lightning across night skies. Her eyes glowed, wide and searching, and the moment they locked on him, his blood ran cold. Selene. He didn't question how he knew. He simply knew. His wolf surged up inside him, a guttural growl ripping from his chest, vibrating with power. Mate. And then, like an echo across the bond, her wolf answered with the same growl, low and trembling, yet certain. Mate. Lucian almost laughed at the cruelty and perfection of fate. All this time, the girl who fought him with fire in her eyes, the girl who carried grief like a crown, she was his. She had always been his. He stepped forward slowly, paws sinking into the wet earth. She tensed but did not run. Instead she stood, chest heaving, the white streaks along her fur shimmering in the moonlight. Lucian lowered his head and pressed his muzzle to hers, nuzzling into the side of her face. He licked her ear once, gentle, reverent. Selene whimpered, the sound soft and raw, before a growl slipped from her throat, uncertain but instinctive. Lucian's wolf growled deep into the night, a sound of claim and belonging shaking the silence around the lake. And then Selene did what he never expected. She lowered her head, not in defeat, not in fear, but in something far deeper. Submission that wasn't weakness, but choice. Because it felt right. Because it felt like home. For a long while, neither moved. They lingered there at the lakeside, pressed close, listening to the quiet thrum of each other's breaths. Lucian's muzzle brushed down her neck, drinking in her scent until his chest felt raw with it. Selene shifted closer, brushing her sleek fur against his, and the touch sent shivers ripping through him. He rumbled low, the kind of sound meant only for her. And Selene, timid at first, answered with a soft whine, pressing her head under his jaw. The bond pulsed between them, steady and undeniable. Finally, Lucian pulled back, amber eyes gleaming. His wolf wanted to test her, to see her run, to see her spirit in motion. With a sudden growl, he bounded toward the trees, pausing just long enough to glance back. Selene blinked, then let out a sharp bark that was half challenge, half laughter, before launching after him. They ran, through the towering trees, over roots and moss, weaving through shadows and shafts of moonlight. Her paws were unsteady at first, but strength quickly found her stride. Lucian slowed just enough for her to keep pace, then surged ahead, daring her to match him. And she did. Their howls rose into the night, one after the other, until they twined together, wild and free. No past, no chains, just the two of them, two wolves bound by something bigger than fate. By the time they circled back to the lake, the moon hung high, silver spilling across the water. They shifted side by side, bones snapping, fur receding, until skin met the night air once again. Lucian pulled on his trousers in silence, jaw tight, but his eyes kept flicking to her. Selene, breathless and flushed, reached for her white dress where she had left it, sliding it over her shoulders. For a moment, she hesitated, fingers brushing the blue moonstone at her throat. Lucian broke the silence first, his voice low but edged like a blade. "You may have been my slave, Selene, but this changes everything." Selene blinked at him, startled by the bluntness, then, because she could never resist, she smirked faintly through her lingering breathlessness. "Funny thing is, I've actually grown fond of the work." He turned to her, brows lifting in something between disbelief and irritation. His wolf bristled under his skin. "Work if you wish," he muttered, stepping closer, his golden eyes fixed on hers. "But you'll do it, knowing what you are. You're mine. My mate." Selene's lips parted, her throat tightening at the sound of it. Lucian exhaled, gaze flicking toward the moon as if trying to make sense of a cruel joke. "I don't know why the goddess did this," he admitted, quieter now. "Why she bound me to you, of all people. But nonetheless, here you are." He looked back at her then, eyes softer but no less fierce. "And here I am, yours." Selene's heart thudded so loudly she swore he could hear it. For once, she had no witty retort, no barbed words, only the rush of heat in her chest and the terrifying, beautiful truth of his claim. A week later, the pack gathered in the great hall for the monthly assembly. Torches crackled along the walls, and every wolf, from the youngest warrior to the oldest elder, filled the space with restless energy. Selene stood off to the side, heart pounding in her chest, hands cold despite the warmth of the flames. She already knew what was coming. Lucian had told her only hours before, in that quiet, commanding way of his, that he wouldn't keep the bond hidden any longer. Lucian rose to his full height at the front, silence falling at once. His gaze swept the room with that same deadly calm he always carried. "She is no longer a prisoner," he announced, his voice carrying like thunder. "Selene is my mate, your future Luna, chosen by the goddess herself." A wave of shock moved through the hall. Murmurs rippled. some sharp with disbelief, others resigned, a few even approving. Kyle's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with frustration. The younger she-wolves whispered behind their hands. But when Lucian's stare cut through the crowd, no one dared speak against him aloud. Selene kept her chin high, though her stomach twisted. Acceptance from some, hatred from others, and yet belonging. Life shifted after that night. She moved into the Alpha's quarters, the heavy oak doors marking a threshold she never imagined crossing. Still, Selene couldn't give up the kitchens entirely. Martha fussed if she stayed away too long, and Selene found comfort in kneading dough, chopping herbs, feeling human again among laughter and gossip. Training became another constant. Lucian sometimes sparred with her himself, their sessions leaving her body aching in ways that had little to do with bruises. He was merciless in drills, pinning her down, correcting her stance with firm, calloused hands. His voice was low at her ear, always controlled, but the way he lingered, the way his words brushed hot against her skin. Focus, Selene, unless you like being on your knees. It always left her pulse hammering, heat curling low in her belly no matter how hard she tried to fight it. She hated how much she craved the next session, the next touch. Selene adjusted the shawl across her shoulders as she entered the council chamber, every eye swiveling toward her. A year ago they would have sneered, some even spat at her feet. Now, as she walked with her head high, her presence stilled the room. The elders leaned in when she spoke, surprised at her clarity of thought, and even the warriors exchanged glances, impressed at her insight when Lucian invited her opinion. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was becoming Luna. Kyle leaned lazily against the wall, smirk tugging at his lips. "Careful, sister-in-law," he drawled after the meeting. "If you keep dazzling them like this, you might actually fool the pack into thinking you belong." His words lacked the sharp bite they once carried, more of a taunt than true venom. Still, Selene only smiled coolly and walked past him, refusing to give him the satisfaction. Later that afternoon, she carried a bundle of reports through the hall, the parchment heavy in her arms. A warrior had asked her help in delivering them to Lucian, and though she tried to tell herself it was just a task, her heart betrayed her, thudding harder with every step toward his office. She set the stack down on his desk. He didn't look up immediately, pen scratching over parchment, but she didn't leave either. The silence stretched. Finally, his dark eyes lifted, catching hers. "If you've nothing else to drop, get out," Lucian said, voice cool, then with a flicker of dry amusement, "unless, of course, you plan to keep me company, perhaps dance on the desk." Selene rolled her eyes, the corner of her lips twitching. "Hardly, but I could help you with the paperwork. I used to help my father sometimes." The words slipped out before she thought, hanging heavy in the air. Lucian's hand stilled on the page. For a long moment, silence. Then, in a low, steady tone, he said, "I will never apologize for what I did to your family, for what your father did to mine. I do not regret it, and I never will. But—" his jaw tightened, his eyes meeting hers. "I hope, one day, you'll understand." Selene inhaled slowly, fingers tracing the edge of the desk. Her chest ached, old wounds tugging, but the ache wasn't the same as before. Softer. "It still hurts," she admitted quietly. "But not like it once did. I think I'm starting to accept it, all of it." For the first time that day, his expression eased just a fraction. He pushed a sheet toward her. "Then prove it. Help me." So she did. They bent over the table, shoulders almost touching, their pens scratching side by side. The room felt warmer, smaller, as though the whole world had shrunk to that desk. Those papers, and the steady rhythm of breathing that wasn't quite in sync but close enough. The pile of scrolls seemed endless, and Selene's hand cramped from the quill as she forced herself to finish another tally. Her neck ached, shoulders stiff from both the weight of paperwork and the brutal sparring Lucian had been subjecting her to. He called it training like a Luna. She called it slow torture. She thought she was subtle when she tilted her head, fingers kneading the knot at her shoulder, but Lucian's sharp eyes caught everything. "You're in pain," he said flatly, not a question. Selene froze, the quill hovering above parchment. "I'm fine." His gaze lingered, dark, unreadable, before flicking to the bruises fading along her collarbone where his sparring strikes had landed earlier that week. "You're sore because you're weak, not because I hit hard." Selene's jaw dropped. "Excuse me." He leaned back in his chair, utterly composed. "If my training makes you ache, it only proves you need more of it." "You call that training?" She shot back, rubbing her neck again. "It feels more like you're trying to snap me in half every time I face you." One brow arched, dangerously close to amusement. "You think I'm going easy on you?" Her glare was sharp, but the soft groan she let out as she rolled her neck betrayed her. Lucian watched her for a moment, then pushed his chair back. He moved with that deliberate, silent grace of his, a predator deciding to close the gap between himself and his prey. Selene stiffened when he stopped beside her. "What are you... Do you want a massage?" His voice was low, calm, yet it thrummed with something she couldn't place. Selene blinked. Her mouth parted, but no sound came. Heat crept into her cheeks, and she turned her face away before he saw. What?" Lucian didn't wait for an answer. His hands settled firmly on her shoulders, large and warm, thumbs pressing into the tight knots beneath her skin. The shock of the contact stole her breath. He worked slowly, methodically, pressing into tense muscles as though he could read her body better than she ever could. Selene's lips parted, a small, helpless sound slipping free before she bit it back. "Relax," Lucian murmured, his breath stirring the loose strands of her hair. "Fighting me every second is exhausting, isn't it?" Her pulse thudded in her ears. "I'm not—" Her voice broke when his thumb pressed a tender spot at the base of her neck. "Fighting you!" A dark chuckle rumbled from his chest, close, far too close. "You fight me with every look, every word. But your body—" His fingers slid, tracing the curve of her shoulder, kneading down the line of her back. "Your body knows when to surrender." Selene shivered, heat flooding low in her belly. She gripped the edge of the desk, desperate to anchor herself, but her head betrayed her, tilting forward under the weight of his touch. Lucian bent, his lips close enough to graze her ear. "Tell me to stop, Selene." "I will." She didn't. Couldn't. The air between them burned, thick with something unspoken, a pull she had resisted for months. Her breaths came faster, and she hated the way her body leaned into his hands, craving more. But then he pulled away, just like that. His warmth vanished, leaving her skin tingling, her pulse racing with the ghost of his touch. Lucian's voice was steady when he spoke again, though his jaw was tight. "That should be enough. You'll sleep easier tonight." Selene turned in her chair, still flushed, her chest rising and falling unevenly. She wanted to yell at him, to curse him for leaving her undone, but the words stuck in her throat, tangled with the fire he'd left simmering inside her. He was already back at his desk, pen in hand, as though nothing had happened. The celebration was loud, laughter and music spilling across the courtyard as the bonfire roared high. Selene sat among the pack, her face calm though her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. Every word, every glance, every toast seemed to circle around her, some in praise, some in doubt. She had learned to hold her chin high. But then Lucian's sister, with her jeweled hair and sharp tongue, leaned close, her smile tight. "You'll never be one of us. I'll never accept you." Selene turned her head, studying her coolly. She could have snapped back, but instead she smiled, calm, deadly sweet. "I understand your animosity," she murmured, her voice soft yet steady. "But mind the words you utter. Not even a sister's tongue is safe if it cuts too deep." The girl blinked, taken aback. Selene didn't wait for her reply. Later, as the night wound down, Selene excused herself. The laughter and music faded as she slipped away, her steps leading her where they always seemed to, into the quiet, the scent of ink and old leather, the library, her sanctuary. She curled herself in the corner seat, drawing her knees close, staring out the tall windows where the moonlight slanted in. Hours passed. The pack's noise dulled into silence, only the rustle of night outside remaining. The door creaked open. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. She didn't look up at first. She already knew. I thought I'd find you here. Lucian's voice broke the stillness, low and edged with something she couldn't name. Selene's lips curved. Of course. Where else would the captive princess-turned-servant-turned-Luna hide from all the staring eyes? His silence made her lift her head. His gaze burned across the room, raw, unguarded hunger that made her breath catch. Before she could think of another quip, he crossed the distance, every step deliberate, and lowered himself in front of her. She blinked, startled, as he knelt before her chair. The Alpha, her enemy, her mate, on his knees. Lucian reached for her ankle, his touch searing even through the thin silk of her dress. You've been on your feet all day. His tone was rough like gravel, but steady. Lucian, what are you? Quiet. It wasn't harsh but commanding, and her words died in her throat. He lifted her foot into his large hands, thumbs pressing against the arch. She meant to complain, meant to ask him what game he was playing, but the first roll of his thumb into her sore muscles ripped the air from her lungs. Her head fell back, a small, unbidden sound escaping her lips. He didn't speak, didn't smirk, just worked her slowly, expertly, until her toes curled. The fire crackled in the corner, shadows licking the walls, and Selene's complaints melted into silence. All she could feel was him, his hands. The way his touch wasn't cruel this time, but devastatingly gentle. Better. His voice was husky, his head tilted up slightly, eyes fixed on her face. Her throat tightened. She wanted to snap something sharp, but all that came was a whisper. Yes. Lucian's hands slid higher to her calf, kneading with slow, steady strokes that left her trembling. You hide here when you're overwhelmed. His gaze never wavered. But don't think I don't see you. Selene's breath quickened. She pressed her palms into the chair, trying to ground herself. You shouldn't be doing this. I do whatever I want. His lips curved, not in cruelty but in certainty. His fingers stilled, wrapping firm around her ankle, his thumb stroking lazily against her skin. And right now, what I want is you. Her pulse thundered, every nerve ending a light. For the first time that night she couldn't look away. Selene sat before the mirror, steam from her bath still clinging to her skin, her long blonde hair damp as she brushed it out. The steady strokes calmed her, but beneath it she was tired, heavy with the memories of the day. Visiting her family's resting place always cut her deeper than she let anyone see. A knock broke the silence. Before she could even answer, his scent slipped under the door. Dark pine, leather, and the faint metallic edge of steel. Her pulse jumped. Lucian entered without waiting, filling the room in a way only he could. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, his eyes moving over her, his jaw tight. Finally, he said, low and controlled, "You were late. I got worried." Selene turned in her chair, lifting her chin. "I told the warriors I'd be fine. I didn't expect you to lose sleep over it." The corner of his mouth twitched, but his eyes stayed serious, intense. He didn't argue. Instead, he moved closer, standing beside her. For a long moment he just watched her brush glide through her hair. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached down, pried the brush from her fingers, and set it aside. Her breath caught. "Lucian." He didn't let her finish. In one fluid motion he slid an arm under her knees and the other around her back, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. Selene gasped, grabbing his shoulder. "What are you doing?" "Taking you where you belong," he said simply, his voice rough but steady. He carried her out of her chamber, down the silent hall, and into his. The air in the Alpha's quarters was heavier, richer, carrying his power and scent. He didn't set her down right away. Instead, he held her against his chest as if daring her to argue. Finally, he lowered her onto the massive bed, his hands lingering at her waist. His gaze locked with hers, smouldering, unguarded. "You've slept alone long enough," he murmured, his thumb brushing the side of her neck, making her shiver. "No more." The pale dawn light seeped through the curtains, soft and silvery against the heavy furs of the Alpha's chamber. Selene stirred, still wrapped in the heat of his body, still overwhelmed by the memory of falling asleep in his arms for the first time. For once, she hadn't dreamt of ashes or loss, just warmth. Her lashes fluttered and the faintest sigh escaped her lips. That was when she felt it. Gentle, deliberate kisses pressing lower, lower, until her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes flew open. "Lucian." Her voice was hoarse with sleep, her body already trembling, but he didn't stop. His hands gripped her thighs, spreading her for him with quiet dominance, his mouth reverent and merciless all at once. Each stroke of his tongue sent sparks racing through her, unraveling the composure she always tried so hard to keep. She writhed, her hands gripping the sheets, then his hair. "Lucian! Oh, goddess!" He growled against her, the sound vibrating through her, as if reminding her exactly who was between her legs, who owned every breath, every sound she made. By the time she shattered beneath his mouth, Selene was crying out his name like a prayer, tears pricking her eyes from the sheer intensity. Before she could recover, he was above her, kissing her swollen lips, his taste still on him, his scent drowning her. His voice was ragged when he spoke. "Mine." Her answer was a soft whimper, and the way her body arched into his. Then he took her, slow at first, stretching her, filling her with a possession that was both tender and brutal. Every thrust was a vow, every groan from his chest an anchor tying her to him. She clung to him, nails dragging down his back, gasps and moans tumbling from her lips as he moved harder, deeper, until all she knew was him. When he finally leaned down, his teeth brushing her neck, her body seized with anticipation. He whispered against her skin, his voice low, primal, "I can't hold back anymore." And then he bit. The sharp sting melted into searing pleasure as his mark sank deep, binding her to him in body and soul. Selene cried out, not from pain, but from the overwhelming rightness that coursed through her veins, as her wolf howled in unison with his. Lucian roared as his release tore through him, burying himself deep, his mark glowing faintly against her skin. When it was over, he collapsed beside her, dragging her into his arms, pressing his forehead to hers. His voice was rough, but gentler than she'd ever heard. "You're mine, Selene. In every way. Always." Her body trembled, but her heart answered before her lips could. Home. A year had passed. A year of being Luna, of waking in cold sweats from memories of ash only to find Lucian's arms pulling her back into warmth. A year of grueling duties, of making decisions beside him that left her drained but proud. A year of laughter with Lily, of quiet dinners with Martha, of warriors who once spat at her feet now bowing their heads in respect. A year of being his. That night the moon was high, casting a silver glow into their chamber. Selene sat at the edge of the bed, her hands folded across her belly, her heart racing like it had on the night she'd first shifted. She'd spoken to Martha earlier that week, then to the pack doctor. Both had smiled, eyes shining with knowing warmth. Tonight she could no longer keep it from him. The door creaked open. His scent, pine, earth, steel, drifted in before him. Lucian's broad shoulders filled the doorway, exhaustion lining his face from another long day of counsels and reports. But when his eyes found her, his expression softened in that rare way she alone got to see. "You should be sleeping," he said in that deep, quiet tone of his, pulling off his shirt. She swallowed. "I had something to tell you first." He stilled, one hand frozen at his belt, his gaze sharpened, the weight of an alpha, of a mate, of a man who feared nothing, except perhaps losing her. Selene's lips trembled, but her smile broke through. "Lucian, we're going to have a pup." For the first time, the ever-composed Alpha seemed struck speechless. His chest rose and fell sharply, eyes flicking from her face to the gentle way her hand lay protectively across her stomach. Then, he moved. In 2 strides he was before her, sinking to his knees. His large, calloused hands covered hers, pressing reverently against the soft swell that would one day grow. His head bowed, and for a moment she thought she saw his shoulders tremble. When he lifted his gaze, there was no mask, no cold Alpha, only Lucian, her Lucian. "My mate," he rasped, his voice breaking. "My Luna. You carry my blood, our future." Selene cupped his face, her thumb brushing his cheek. "I wanted you to be the first to know." He kissed her palm, then her wrist, then her lips, slow, hungry, worshipful. That night, he did not take her like the Alpha claiming what was his. He touched her like she was a miracle, his hands mapping every curve, every breath, as if memorizing her all over again. He laid her on their bed as though she were spun glass, trailing kisses over her skin, murmuring promises between each one. "I will protect you." His lips pressed to her collarbone. "I will protect them." His hands lingered over her belly. "I will love you, Selene, until my last breath." His voice broke against her neck. When he finally slid into her, it wasn't fast or brutal. It was slow, deep, a worship that made her gasp his name into the night. Every thrust was a vow, every kiss a prayer, every touch a claim more binding than the mark on her neck. Selene clung to him, her body trembling, overwhelmed not just by pleasure but by the raw, unguarded love pouring out of him. When he whispered home against her lips, she knew he meant her, them, this life they were building together. Afterward, Lucian didn't let her go. He cradled her close, one hand protective over her belly, his other tangled with hers. For the first time in years, the Alpha who carried every scar of vengeance slept with peace written across his face. And Selene, wrapped in his arms and in the glow of new life, finally felt whole.